Well, good morning. Good morning. I hope everyone is warm. I think that the heating might now be on, but it's not on may not come on till a bit later. But great to see you all here. I thought I'd wear the beanie. It was a great day yesterday at the MCG. There may be varying views about the result, but it was a great day, and a terrific day for Neil Dano's family and of course for the MND cause. Do we have any visitors? Yes.
Kevin Rose.
Kevin, Laurie's brother, I assume. Kevin, very welcome. You're no doubt here to make sure that he's on the ball, are you?
Spot on.
Okay, good. You're very welcome. Good to see you. Do we have any anniversaries, special dates that we need to mention?
Donald's rump next weekend.
It's a sad day for us because we've lost one of our long-standing members, Len Edwards, who was a great contributor to our club, and Graham will say a few words about Len shortly, and also about another one of our stalwarts, Bert Berriman, who's had a bit of a tumble and is currently in the repack. So we think of Len's family and we think of Bert. I'll run through the roll. Peter Bedford.
Yep.
Noel Benton. Bruce Berriman's an apology. Bruce Bazant.
Yes.
Ted Breer.
Apology.
Michael Coffey.
Yes.
Michael Doherty.
Yeah.
John Doherty, I think, is still overseas, so he'll be an apology. Robert Yerbaker.
Here.
Alan Evans. Brian Fitt. Great to see you, Brian. Great to see you making the effort to get here, mate. Terrific. Frank Henning.
Yep.
Margaret Henning.
Yeah.
Detlef Hingst.
Yes.
Reg Jackson is an apology. I'm here. My wife will be here shortly. Pat Kelly.
Yeah.
Good to see you back from your travels, Pat. Joe Landsberg.
Yep.
Di Landsberg.
Yep.
Peter McCartney.
Yeah.
John Metcalf. Graham Ratton.
Yes.
Dave Ratton.
Yeah.
Laurie Rose.
Yeah.
Kevin Ryan. Will Simler.
I'm half here.
Well, half of you here, Will, is better than the full amount of most of us. So terrific to see you here, mate. David Taylor, Les Sterling,
Yep.
Keith Tupper,
Bridget.
Livia Turasek,
Yeah.
and Pamela McDonald.
Thursday.
All right, is there anyone here who I haven't called out, whose name should be called out? All right. We've got, first of all, I'd like Pam McDonald to come forward, if she wouldn't mind.
Somewhere. Thank you. Oh, one more down.
Just watch these
Yes.
chords, Pam. That's it. Pam, a bit of an oversight, we should have done this earlier, but I'd like to formally welcome and induct Pam as a member of the Probus Club of Heidelberg. She's very welcome. We're very pleased to have her on board. And would you like to show your appreciation in the usual way? Now, could I ask Di Landsberg, Margaret Hemming, Michael Coffey and Pat Kelly to come forward? Just watch the chords there, guys.
Yep.
We've got some goodies from Partnership, Probus Partnership Pacific relating to their membership, which we'd like to present to them this morning, now that they are members of our club. And our secretary has got this material and he will provide it to you.
We'll just do it in order of the cards.
Yep.
Di,
Thank you.
your official card. There's the advertising blurb that goes with it. Margaret. Oops, sorry. Pam.
Thank you. Thank you. Oops, sorry.
Michael.
Yeah.
And Patrick.
Thank you.
Would you like to all give them a warm welcome? Thank you guys, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Just watch those cords.
Yes, I'll be careful. There we go.
Kevin, Ryan, anything to report financial wise?
Not a lot, David. We've got $911 in the bank, not much of a change from last month. The small in and the small out, so that's just under $1,000.
Okay.
Nothing else.
We're still solvent, Kev, we're still solvent.
Yep.
Okay. Graham, would you like to give us a report on how our members are going, and of course also you might like to say a few words about Len. If you stand close to me, the mic will pick it up.
Okay. Good morning. Now, Len joined the club on 2018. He was a member who came to everything, to the meetings and to outings, for about 4 or 5 years. And then Len developed a problem which affected his mobility, and that has just got gradually worse over the last couple of years. I've been unable to talk to Len for about 18 months or so, but I have been speaking to Selma, his wife, every month, so that I've been appraised of his progress, and I've kept the members of the club notified about how he was going. Unfortunately, he died last week. I'm not sure when the funeral will be. It hasn't been decided yet. Definitely
Thursday next week.
Thursday next week. Thank you for that. So that's that's what's happening next week. Thursday. Do we know a time?
No.
It'll be at the church. Anyhow, we'll find out.
Yeah.
Now, Bert, I've spoken to Liz Berryman, Bert's daughter, and he, as you know, had a fall some 6 weeks ago, so he wasn't at the last meeting. He did have trouble with a knee prior to that, and that trouble has become worse as a result of that fall. And he's also, so he spent some time in the Austin and Repat, and I understand that he will be moving to maybe to
the old Blue Cross.
Blue Cross in Lauderdale Road.
Lauderdale Road, yeah.
The other person I'd like to mention is Reg Jackson. Reg also fell just prior to the last meeting, and he spent some time in hospital, and he, excuse me, I'll just put my glasses on. He was in, I mentioned last month that he was at Kew Botanica. I spoke to him yesterday, and he's now home, so he's very pleased about that. But he's unable to, not allowed to drive at the moment, which is making him a bit unhappy. his mobility is still a bit upset from the fall. Now, for the cultured people, on the 16th of August, the Heidelberg Choral Society, conducted by Peter Bandy, is presenting Solomon at 2:30 on Sunday the 16th of August. There are some dodges about that on the table at the back. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Graham. Thanks, Graham. And whilst we're talking about dodges on at the table at the back, Robert Burbacker has brought some Banyule Age and Focus booklets, which are also available on the table at the back. All right, well now, Members' Corner this morning is going to be presented by Laurie Rose. Just give us a couple of minutes to get things sorted out, because Laurie's going to have some visual presentation, and then we'll get underway with Members' Corner.
Fellow Protus members, I'm going to talk today on the Trans-Siberian Railway. In 2011, Jane and I did a train trip from Vladivostok to Moscow, and ever since that I've taken a bit of an interest in the railway. This isn't a travel story, as you'll see, it's about the railway itself. That's what we're talking about, Trans-Siberian Railway. It goes from Moscow to Vladivostok, about 10,000 kilometres, and it was a very major undertaking. I'll talk about the need for it and choosing the railway gauge and some issues with building it, and then the railway today. Well, it's about 10,000 kilometres across. To go by road or surface transport took about 3 months. So if you're in Moscow, you want to go to Vladivostok, that was 3 months on cart or horse or whatever. And Russia had only a small population in Siberia. Japan had a big population over there, and China had a big population in the east of Russia, near east of Russia. And it was very important for the Russians to get a way of populating the east of the country. The other thing, they had a big naval base in Vladivostok, but the trouble was 3 months by road and 3 months by sea to supply it from the other end, from the western end of the country. That's you looking down on the North Pole, just to show you what a big amount of distance there is between Moscow and Vladivostok. That's the emblem of Russia. It's an eagle looking 2 ways. For our purposes, looking to the east and looking to the west. All right, the railway era started in 1830 with the Liverpool to Manchester Railway, and George Stephenson built it, and he picked a gauge which was 4 foot 8.5. Anyway, the Tsar at the time, in about 1838, decided that he wanted a nice railway between St. Petersburg and Moscow, and he sent 2 of his engineers over to America. He had a preference for American engineers, and told them to come back with a good railway engineer. They came back with this fellow, George Whistler, and he built the railway between St. Petersburg and Moscow, and it was up and running in 1851, which was before we had any railways. It was a 600 kilometre dual track thing, so it was a very good thing. The trouble was he built it in a 5 foot gauge. The next slide, please. This is a map of USA from 1861, and the green lines represent 5 foot gauge railway lines. The red ones represent the Stevenson gauge 4 foot 8.5. You can see that the green ones won. There's not much, 6% difference, hardly any operational issues. And the big thing the green one had for it was that it was an even number, exactly 5 feet.
Yes.
Building a railway, well, it was a major undertaking. Getting halfway was no benefit. It had to go from one end to the other. Even got 3/4 of the way, it was very bad value. And the aim was to get the most amount of track for the smallest amount of money. So they cut corners everywhere. They used iron for rails and did very shallow cuttings and thin embankments and cheaply built bridges. Everything was on a budget. And that's Azar who authorised it. This is Azar's son, who became Tsar Alexander II or something, and he's in Vladivostok, the other end. They started from both ends, and they also started from a place in the middle too, that had a river. Well, they quickly worked out that it was going to be very hard work to stay within Russia, so they did a deal with the Chinese government, got a concession, whereby they could build a railway at their gauge, the 5 foot gauge, and the freight would go in without any duty or excise, and the passengers could go across without a passport or a visa. So they got everything their way. China wasn't very strong in making deals in that era. And the bit, that's where they cut the corner. They went through Chinese territory, much easier to do, and they didn't have to cross the big river, which we'll come to later. That's another view. Russia's in green, China's in brown, and they just cut the corner. That's another way of putting it. This river is on the border of Russia and China, and the way they did it, they just crossed a few tributaries, but when they stayed in Russia, they did a big crossing of that Amur River. Another obstacle was a big lake, Lake Baikal. It's just above Mongolia, a blue line. And now we'll zoom in a bit. Next one, please. There it is, Mongolia, and we'll zoom in once more. It's 600 kilometres from north to south, and at the bottom of it is very hilly country with hard rocks and everything, and they chose, early in the part, not to build a railway around here, but instead to have a ferry across it. That's the ferry. Was built in Great Britain, Newcastle on Tyne, 8,000 tonnes, had 3 tracks for the rails, and was disassembled when they built it in England. The parts were all numbered. The parts were put on a train to get to this Lake Baikal, and then was reassembled and launched. Now, they didn't have all their wits about them because this lake freezes badly. Although that ship, the Baikal, was built partly as an icebreaker, there were times when it couldn't sail. And then they had to transfer the cargo across by sled. And 1 year, or a couple of years, actually built rails on the ice and carted the wagons over one at a time with horse-drawn wagons. Now, that couldn't last because they're on the ice, and they built a railway south of the lake called the Circumpolar Railway, 33 tunnels, and very lot of work, hard work, single track of course. They finished in 1904 in February. Japan did a surprise attack on the Russian fleet in Vladivostok, and that was before this was finished. Anyway, the Japanese, this was finished a few months later, the Japanese worked out how much material and soldiers could go across, assuming it was two-way traffic, you had to go one way and wait, go the other way. What they didn't realise was the Russians sent all their wagons one way, they built them and didn't send them back, they only had a single track. This river we saw in the map earlier. Basically the one that had to cross the Amur River there, this Khabarovsk, and there was a lot of trouble. Yeah, that's the Khabarovsk, so they're going to cross it, and they stayed inside their territory. That's the bridge on its opening day. It was opened in 1816, took a lot of work. The unfortunate thing was Russia had a civil war, and in 1820, 2 of these spans were blown up. So they couldn't use it for 5 years until 1825 when they fixed the bridge. That was a lesson for them. We'll come to that now. Between 1937 and 1932, in complete secrecy, the Russians built a tunnel under the Amur River next to the bridge. And the idea was that if they went towards Japan, the Japanese would wake up that they could be very vulnerable if that bridge was blown up, but they wouldn't know about the tunnel. And the tunnel's the only underwater tunnel in the Russian railway system. The railway today, it's been a big success because it goes from one end to the other. That was the aim of it. It's had a lot of money spent on it in the Cold War. After the Soviet Union dissolved, it had a time when it wasn't so much spent on it. But today it's a very good railway. There 2 tracks all the way from one end to the other, all electrified since 2002. And lovely locomotives. And big earthworks. We'll see here, it's not the original alignment, I'm sure. Now, I'll come back to this gauge thing. China, which is one of the big users of freight between itself and Europe, is on the same gauge as Europe is, the standard gauge. And trains can't run through from China through Russia to, just say, Germany. They have to change the bogies or transship the freight or something. So that's a bit of a disaster. And it's got a big future because there's a lot of freight going between China and Europe, and time is money, and you can do it quicker by rail than you can by sea. That's a marker, a distance marker on the platform in the station in Moscow. It says 0 kilometres from where you are and 9,298 kilometres to where you're going. Here's the marker on the station in Vladivostok, 9,288 kilometres from the start. And on top of the pillar is a 2-headed eagle. And that about wraps it up. Moscow to Vladivostok in 10 minutes.
Thanks, Laurie.
Okay. We've got a couple of interesting videos, one from Probus Pacific, and the other one you may be familiar with, but I think it's very important for people of our age. I'll say no more.
Hello, I'm Heather Hewitt, spokesperson for the celebration of Probus's 50 years in Australia. And what an exciting time this is. Since the first Probus Club was launched in Hunters Hill in Sydney back in 1976, clubs have been set up in suburbs and towns right across Australia, and we need to keep growing. As we celebrate 50 years of Probus in Australia, we want to encourage more people to come and see what Probus can offer. That's easy social connections, making lasting friendships, and having lots of fun together. There's a real benefit in having fresh faces in your club. New members bring new ideas, enthusiasm, and of course, more members to serve on committees. Let's work together to attract new members and get them to come along to a meeting. They'll see for themselves the wonderful social connections that can be made in your club. There's a wide range of promotional and media material available on the Probus website to help you get the word out. Let's use this 50th anniversary celebration to boost our membership and spread the joy of our touchstones: connection, community, and friendship.
I'm very pleased to introduce our guest speaker today, Noel Clement, OAM. Jackie and I had the privilege of hearing Noel speak at a luncheon not that long ago about his activities and his work, which led me to think he'd be a fantastic speaker for our club. So he very kindly agreed to come along and devote his time to talk to us today. He's very much involved with not-for-profit organisations and has been involved with them for over 34 years. And one of the main areas in which he is involved is with refugees and community involvement with refugees. So he will speak no doubt about that today, but also a variety of areas in which he's interested. And one of the major ones is a very important one to us, and that's the SES, the emergency services. So would you like to give Noel a big Probus welcome?
Thank you, David, and great to see you all, great to be here. My presentation today, I am relying on the presentation that David saw last time, but I will emphasise different aspects. So it was done in the context of the school actually that both David and I attended, Parade College, so I've got some sort of content of what took me into community work and community development, but then I am happy to go deeper on any of the areas that might be of particular interest. So we might just move on. Do I click? You click? So we'll move on to maybe the next one. Maybe on to the next slide. So just okay. So as I said, I went to Parade College, not far away. So I grew up out in Hurstbridge. My family moved out there from the inner city. So I bussed it to Parade and joined a group called Edmund Rice Society, which was a volunteer group within the school that worked largely with people with intellectual disabilities. So I used to go out to Chiringa, just out in Greensborough, many of you may know it, and on Monday nights would run activities with, they were children, it was a school, as well as a home, run activities out there. And then later in schooling went to Janefield Training Centre that again, many of you may remember, no longer exists in Bundoora, just across the paddocks from Parade. Was a bit more confronting because that was the days of institutions and it was very much an institutional setting for people with intellectual disabilities. And a number of the people that I remember working with were non-verbal and living in fairly locked environments. So that was fairly confronting. But my approach to wanting to work with community at that time came very much from that sort of charitable model of wanting to help people that I thought were less advantaged, and came very much from a more caring, help, charity sort of model. So I might shift on to the next slide, if that's okay, Bruce. But that shifted fairly significantly. I knew I wanted to do something working with people. I became a social worker. A lot of people enter social work from that real helping sort of perspective, often wanting to do good but not really understanding the nature of the work and the nature of situations that put people in touch with social workers in the first place. So coincidentally, I travelled a very short distance across the road from Parade, just down the road, to what was then Phillip Institute, now part of the RMIT campus, but it was its own separate institute at the time, and it was a 4-year social work degree. In many ways, for me, it was a very transformative experience, because it completely reshaped how I saw social issues, how I saw communities, and how I saw the reasons that people come in contact with social workers. So I'm not dissing charitable work. In fact, I'll come back to it. I spent a lot of time in the charitable sector. But it gave me a much more critical sort of perspective of what goes on in society, and why some people have, some people don't, and the sorts of issues of discrimination, racism and other issues that exist in our society. I was fortunate. It was a 4-year course. It had a very strong focus on the sector, so I was able to do 3 placements. So effectively I spent about 9 months of the course in community service organisations. First was actually out in Broadmeadows at what was then Broadmeadows Community Health Service, doing a community video project, which was largely, exploring the different supports and assistance available to people in the community and producing a video for the Community Health Service. That gave me a taste for community health, and I'll come back to it, but that was my sort of plan coming out of social work, was to get into community health. My second placement was at Brunswick Council, so I'm dating myself talking about separate councils. You will remember them all individually. So I worked in the aged care area of Brunswick Council for a few months, doing aged care assessments and working with the team that did Meals on Wheels, home help, etc. there. And then my final year placement was actually at Victorian Council of Social Service. And it was a very sort of policy focused placement, very much on driving social change, looking at how do we reform our policies, our work as community, to try and improve the situation for people who largely are experiencing poverty. So that whole period of 4 years absolutely transformed how I saw the work that I was doing, why I came into social work, and I came out a very different person to what I'd gone in with. I didn't lose the sort of social justice angle that I'd gone in with. I didn't lose my sense of wanting to help people, but it became, in some ways, more radicalised, frankly, more action-focused. I was a bit of a rat bag coming out of that course, which I'll talk to in a minute. But very much, as you do often with university, came out with a very strong sort of theoretical framework of what was happening, what was wrong with society, and in many ways quite idealistic. So I might go on to the next one, Bruce. Thanks. One of the things about the social work course that I did, and coincidentally I'll come back to it, but full circle, I'm teaching in that course now. One of the things that course did for me was really steer me away from big institutional sort of work. So I had no desire to go and work in those big institutions. I did go for a job at Royal Park when it was a psychiatric hospital. Thank my lucky stars I didn't get the job. I didn't want to work in child protection, very important work, but it's a bit of a damned if you do, damned if you don't sort of situation, certainly back in those days. There are lots of excellent workers in child protection, but that's not where I thought I could make the biggest difference. So I really wanted to get into community health, as I mentioned. And in those days, you might remember community health centres were standalone, multidisciplinary services that had one social worker, a physiotherapist, a podiatrist, an occupational therapist, all trying to work in a very holistic manner with community and thinking about what are those, what I call the social determinants of health. What are the things that keep us in good health and well-being that are really about how we live, how we operate as a society, and very preventative focused, so very health promotion focused. That's where I wanted to go because I'd had a taste of that. But in those days, you couldn't get a job straight out of uni in community health. So I chose instead actually to go into community development on the large public housing estate in North Richmond, which is still there. And again, look, coming out of Pitt social work, yes, I was, fairly radicalised in my sort of view of things, but I was also very idealistic and had all these sorts of thoughts that communities would be ready to work with me and want to change their circumstances and really get together and push for change. And I went into the high-rise estate there, which was probably 75-80% Indo-Chinese, so Vietnamese refugees, East Timorese refugees. There was a fair number of people who'd been there, Anglo background, public housing tenants who'd been there for decades, and then there were a smattering of other communities as well. And the whole purpose of the Tenants' Council, as it was called then, was actually about tenants taking control of management of the estate. So it was very much up my alley in how I saw community work. So it's what we refer to as sort of bottom-up. It's the community being able to lead rather than being told constantly what to do, create their own solutions, be able to advocate for the sorts of change they wanted. So all of that was fantastic for me from a sort of perspective of what I thought I might be able to achieve. My naivety was communities aren't always that ready to engage, in more critical action. People who are dealing with poverty, who are dealing with significant issues, are surviving day to day. So their focus is on day-to-day survival and, what do I need to do today? What do I need to do next? There were some people who were very ready to get together, and a lot of work had already been done on that estate. But there was also a lot of apathy. There were communities, I mentioned Indo-Chinese communities. A lot of my talk around, community leading, community advocating, demanding change, for them sounded a bit like communism that they had fled from. So they were it was more Confucius, sort of master servant, teacher student. No, we want the government to tell us what to do. So that challenged my naivety in how do I work. But it was a really formative. I was only there a couple of years, but a really formative couple of years for me, in a sense, to cut my teeth. To become much more pragmatic and realistic about what I could achieve, but not to lose, I guess, my broader analysis of what was going on in society. That has never shifted for me. So 35, 40 years now since I started social work, that analysis of society and what drives poverty and discrimination, etc., is still pretty strong for me. I became much more pragmatic in how do you deal with it, what can you do, and how do you get communities involved? And frankly, working from where communities are at was, pretty simple, but first lesson. Some of the stories here, again, happy to come back to any of it. So these were my bosses. So that was me in the background. So my Tenants' Council was a group of about 8 or 10 tenants that had been elected to sit like a local government council, but on the estate. They would make decisions about what we focused on. There was me and one other worker, Long Huynh, who I think's out of the image there, who was a Vietnamese man. I was the only one with community development, sort of social work training, and I was 22. I was a bit of a rat bag, thought I knew what I was doing, and I had a really mixed bag of people that I was working with on the estate. Some, as I said, had been there for a long time. This woman, Stephanie here, was learning Sanskrit and, was highly educated. Very different mix of people. So I learned a lot about who lives on public housing estates. I learned a lot about community, because there was this sense for people, and for me prior to that public housing estates were hellholes, they were places people didn't want to live. This was a thriving community. These were people who loved living on this estate. It had a lot of advantages. Stephanie's apartment, I remember, in building 106, my office was underneath it. Fantastic view over East Melbourne to the city. Fantastic transport access. A lot of great things. A lot of problems with the buildings, and that's what this was about, was government had promised to make upgrades to the facilities as part of an election, and then was backtracking. So we did advocate. We got involved with our local member. These were the days of, was an ALP government at the time, Dimitri Dollis was our local member. Were the days when you could go to the local member, you could organise public meetings. So we'd have public meetings of tenants, we'd get 200 or 300 people there, you'd get the local member there, you'd get the councillors there, you'd push, you'd get some change happening. And the development on Elizabeth Street did happen coming out of that. There was a problem with lifts. If there was a fire, there were only 2 lifts in the building. So we were trying to get some action done on that. Yung Yup was living on the estate, the only East Timorese woman who's now a leader in the East Timorese community in Australia. We wanted to get her onto council at one stage because we thought that was a way to have influence locally. That estate was about a quarter of Richmond's population, but got nothing from the council. So we naively again thought we'll get someone onto council. We actually lost, I think it was about 90 votes after preferences. In the end, it was probably the best outcome because the local member from the council for that ward, who happened also, they were ALP, but they were, it's a whole lot of detail that I will never understand about party politics. I never wanted to be part of party politics. But they were people who previously lived on the estate and thought they still represented the estate, didn't recognise it had moved on a lot. But what that gave us was then they were prepared to meet with us. So they came and met with us every month with the Tenants' Council. So we had influence. We didn't have to support a councillor directly. So it wasn't the outcome we thought we wanted. It was probably a better outcome. And then I did end up in community health, which is over on the right. Again, me being a bit of a ratbag. They were the days when, you know, I guess you just sort of, jump in boldly. I was asked one day to be on the back of a ute out, that's the side of Bob Hawke's office in Coburg. There's a coffin there which says RIP ALP policies. And because I was very skinny, they decided I could be Recession Santa who'd lost a lot of weight. So I'll tell you, it was early 90s, tells you time period, knowing it's recession. So yeah, I learned a lot, and for most of the rest of my working life, I've always had a photo of that estate in North Richmond on my desk where I work, because I want that to ground me all the time, to coming back to, those first realisations. I haven't got a lot on my slides about community health, but I'm happy to come back to it. I'll just say I did 11 years in community health. I was there as a sole social worker. I had 4 bilingual workers, Greek, Italian, Turkish and Arabic, working with me. And then within 2 years, Jeff Kennett came in Victoria. The world of not-for-profit sector and communities, councils changed, as you'll well remember. So there was a lot of mergers of community health services. We went from a standalone, I was on the Bell, I think we're on Bell Street. 93 Bell Street is where I was, the Coburg Community Health Centre. We merged with Brunswick, then we took over, northern Moreland area, became Moreland Community Health Service. And as we grew, I moved into management roles, first team leadership, then more senior roles. So within about probably 7 or 8 years, I'd moved out of a lot of direct service role into much more policy, leadership, advocacy, which is how I spent a lot of my career. But again, community health was in the community. It was embedded. My board were all local community residents. It was the days when residents would come in and it'd be a drop-in centre. People would drop in, have a coffee, they'd do a wander and say hello to people in their offices. very different community service environment to what we've got now with screens and locked doors and having to have appointments to see anybody. So we might move forward, thanks, Bruce. And as I said, I'm happy to come back. So I spent 11 years in community health, and as I said, the world of small community organisations had changed radically. So I'd gone from a 2 staff member organisation to a, I think, 15 staff member organisation in community health, which grew to about 150, I think, by the time I left. I, by this time, had decided to go and do a master's, and I did my master's in social policy at RMIT. So PIT had become part of RMIT. The social work course that I did was now at RMIT. And I was being encouraged to go and do an MBA or do something like that. And I don't know at the time that I was really clear on why I was resisting that, but I know in hindsight very much now, for me, study, these jobs, all these things for me are a pathway to trying to achieve change. They're not the end in themselves. So I didn't want to just learn about organisations. I didn't want to just learn how to do budgets. I wanted to maintain my critical thinking about society. So I did a master's with social policy and community service management that in a sense, I'll use the word re-radicalised me, not in the scary radicalising sort of space, but it did re-challenge me and reset how I saw society, because I'd been in the sector at this stage for 12 years or so. And you become very pragmatic. You start to just go along with, the wave and just get used to the way things are. And I didn't want to do that. I wanted to unsettle myself and wanted to challenge myself. And really from then forward, my sort of mantra with my work has always been, how do I do myself out of a job? What needs to change so that social workers don't need to be here? And I'm not, again, I bring some more deliberate idealism now to it. I'm still very pragmatic, and you'll hear that, and there'll be people who criticise me for being too much about incremental change, etc., because I'm not someone who wants to wait for the revolution to come, and I have no confidence that revolutions necessarily make things better anyway. So I am very much about how do we change the system we're in. But I want to maintain that really critical focus and, in effect, put my feet to the flames and challenge myself whether or not I'm just being complicit. Did my master's and needed to do something different. So I actually took a 9-month job at Red Cross. I couldn't decide what I wanted to do. I was at that point in my career where I'd been managing all the social and community services in law and community health before I left. There was a career sort of trajectory for me into leadership, CEO type roles. But a bit like doing the MBA, content's really important to me. The work that we do is really what it's all about for me. So I didn't want to lose touch with that. So I wanted to find a way that I could still be working in human services, still have a big role in that change, but recognise that probably my skills and where I was at, I was going to be better in more leadership sort of positions. So I went into Red Cross with a 9-month job working on a thing called the Asylum Seeker Assistance Program. Coincidentally, 90% of the people on that program were East Timorese, because the East Timorese had been in the country for 10 years and their visa status had not been resolved. They were here supposedly temporarily. This scheme was established to provide support to them. It was like a mirror of Medicare and Centrelink that we ran. So we gave fortnightly income support and paid for health services. Only up to 90%. There was always this thing they can't get as much as citizens would get. So I went in there for 9 months and I left about 20 years later. I'm a stayer, I will say that. So Asylum Seekers has really been a big part of my work since then. I've worked with refugees since my very first job. But in terms of a focus for my work, it was going into Red Cross that it really became a big part of what I've done since. Disasters as well, I was there for that first 9 months, and then they did a bit of a restructure, and I got this job that was managing all the asylum seeker refugee work and also managing disasters. I was managing first aid, and I was managing youth programs. I'd done youth programs before, had no experience specifically in disasters, and unfortunately had to cut my teeth on the Bali bombings, which many of you will remember, you all remember, I'm sure. So I was responsible for the Bali appeal, which went to hell in a handbasket. Again, I'm happy to go into any of this in more detail. I was responsible for the 2010 Black Saturday bushfires appeal, which was about, I think Bali was about 15 million. I think the Black Saturday one was 300 or 400 million. I supported the international team with the Indian Ocean tsunami appeal. So a lot of my work over a number of years became very large fundraising appeals, distribution, how do we provide support to people impacted by disasters, as well as starting to, I went to Red Cross at a time when they had been running very much as 8 separate state and territory organisations, and we were very much trying to, I was in the national office, trying to look at how does Red Cross really have impact across Australia, because it has amazing access and potential that a lot of other organisations didn't have. It's an apolitical organisation, it's not religious, it's embedded in communities, its lifeblood is volunteers, it's trusted, it's got an amazing brand, it connects to an international movement. So I spent a lot of that next 20 years trying to help reshape what Red Cross was doing, trying to look at how Red Cross has a bigger impact. Again, with asylum seekers, refugees and disasters being the 2 tracks that I was responsible for my whole time there. But in the end, I ended up, the last few years, so I had a whole lot of roles. I moved into more senior leadership roles. But in the end, the last few years before I left, I was director of programs, so I led all of the work we did across Australia. So I had all of the program heads reporting through to me, as well as all the state and territory directors. So it was only the international program that wasn't reporting directly to me, but I was responsible for the work we did in refugees and asylum seekers internationally. So I'd taken on a lot of responsibility. I saw a lot of my work as how do I protect and enable and support good work to happen, because I was no longer practicing as a community worker, social worker, but I was in a strong position to be able to support and encourage and enable people to do good work. So we did a lot of work around monitoring the conditions of detention. So I visited Manus Island, Nauru, Christmas Island, all the major detention centres. We did a lot of work following every disaster. We worked with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities. We worked with older people through programs like Telecross, very diverse range of things the Red Cross did and still does. And the scandal thing, a bit of the bookend for me with Red Cross, as I said, 9 months in, I managed the Bali appeal, which I describe as going to hell in a handbasket, but that was more the media response. There were some mistakes made, but I am comfortable in a large part with what we did. I learned a lot from it, so the way we did those other appeals was very different. But the end of my time there was the Big Black Summer bushfires appeal in 2019, which absolutely erupted in terms of media attention, and that was me on the Channel 9 Today Show, I think it was Karl Stefanovic telling me he wasn't going to get aggressive, but getting stuck into me. And then I was the witness for Red Cross for the Royal Commission into bushfires. So during COVID, I had the opportunity, I guess, character building opportunity to present, I think it was 3 times publicly with the Royal Commission. I was there on day 2 of the Royal Commission. not knowing what the Royal Commission's intention was, and having had lawyers basically prepare me for, they're after you, just, answer, what you're asked and nothing more. And the heart of me is a community worker, social worker that wants to explain and wants people to understand what you're doing and why you're doing it. And media. I've done a lot of media by this stage. In the media, you try and be as open and honest and answer the question and help people understand what you're doing. Royal Commissions are very different, I discovered. Well, certainly the way lawyers prepare you for Royal Commissions is very different. They weren't after us. Now, I could have made a mess of it if I'd just taken my own counsel, so always take counsel from those with much more experience and knowledge than me. But we came through the Royal Commission fairly well. A lot of recommendations from that Royal Commission, like all Royal Commissions, mostly not implemented. But again, in terms of the bushfire appeal, some of the things that we were being attacked about, this was 3 weeks in, was basically that we didn't have the $400 million already in people's pockets. Again, I can go into this in more detail. Reality is we didn't have all the $400 million in, for starters, and secondly, it takes people a long time, those most impacted, it can take them a long time to come forward for help. So we don't chase people in hospitals and on their blocks trying to get them to take money because we're ready to give money. And the third thing, which again comes from my strong social justice angle, there was always a bit of a narrative that it's simple, all you've got to do is work out how many people lost their houses, divide the money by that many people, done. And it takes no account of people's capacity to recover and the very different experiences of people who've got full insurance or no insurance. People who have families, maybe with children with disabilities, living on disability support pension versus people who have dual incomes. We didn't means test it, but we absolutely looked at people's capacity to recover and tried to make sure that larger amounts went to people to get them back on their feet, not just this assumption that everybody needs exactly the same. Everybody got something. There was no issue with that. Might keep moving, sorry, Bruce. So just a couple more slides and then I'm happy to dive into any specific areas. Because Red Cross is a global organisation, I have had some amazing opportunities through my career. As I mentioned, Indian Ocean tsunami. I wasn't part of the international team, but because I'd managed the Bali appeal, I was closely involved in sort of managing some of the risks and how do we, do this the best way we possibly can while sticking to our principles. I ended up going to Banda Aceh and Malabo, which is parts of the very top of Sumatra that were hit by the tsunami 3 weeks after the tsunami, and was part of negotiating the projects that we as Australian Red Cross would fund because we had hundreds of millions of dollars. I got to visit Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans 12 months after Hurricane Katrina happened, and so American Red Cross I'd had a bit of involvement with. They'd supported us with Bali. Again, happy to come back to it. The difference, I talk about this to students when I'm teaching community work, the difference between these two was dramatic. Within 3 weeks, basically Banda Aceh was moonscaped. The military had come in and completely cleared it. Within 12 months, that's how New Orleans still looked. Completely different approach, neither of which I would support. Both have huge, huge problems. But America, it's when it really first struck me just how different a society America is, where even American Red Cross was shocked when the Australians and Europeans that were on the travel trip that I was on were all a bit surprised, where was your government? Why is it looking like this? Why isn't government doing something? Because a lot of people, largely poor black neighbourhoods that had got hit, had been shipped out to Dallas, Fort Worth, various other places. There was no plan to bring them back. That's people's individual responsibility. Even our bus driver from American Red Cross took us past his house. He spent all his weekends cleaning mud out of his house with no help. we couldn't fathom it as Australians, and the Europeans couldn't fathom it either. But he was very much in that American, you know, everyone can be a millionaire, but also everyone, you know, needs to stand on their own 2 feet, and, you know, the state or government's not responsible for you. So I learned a lot about, frankly, strengths of Australia and some of the approaches that we take in comparison. I was in leadership roles within Red Cross, Red Crescent movement, so I was fortunate. I was one of 3, 4, I think we had 4 co-chairs for the Migration Leadership Platform, one from the Federation Red Cross, Red Crescent Societies, one from the International Committee of Red Cross, myself and the Secretary General of the Maldivian Red Crescent at the time. So that was fantastic to drive change in the way that Red Cross, Red Crescent got involved with refugees and asylum seekers. And Red Cross, Red Crescent global conferences bring together, so Red Cross is the keepers of the Geneva Conventions. So all the governments that signed on to the Geneva Conventions and all the Red Cross, Red Crescent societies in those countries come together every 4 years. So these are massive conferences, they're like the UN, and they are opportunities to really try and get some change in government. So yeah, fantastic opportunities. Final slide, thanks Bruce. So quickly now, so I left Red Cross after 20 years of my own accord. They were doing some restructures again. I was managing 60% of the organisation. It didn't make sense for that to happen. It was happening because I'd managed all parts of it at various points. And frankly, I had been keen to take on the full role, but I understood why the organisation saw that as a bit of a risk and wanted to reshape it. They were offering me a role. It was a fantastic role they were offering me, that was still managing all of the programs. But it just wasn't sitting right in my gut, and I've learned through the years to listen to my gut. As much as I'm a stayer, I don't love change, but when change happens, normally once I accept it, I lock in. And it wasn't happening this time, so something wasn't clicking for me. So I decided to leave. No plan, against all the advice everyone gave me, decided to leave. I managed to have an accident at home. So a typical man injury, fell off a ladder. I was getting bitten by European wasps at the time. But I tore my patella tendon in 3 places, a really freaky injury, and it gave me permission just to stop. I was in a leg brace for 4 months, but I just stopped and decided what I wanted to do was continue. Firstly, I knew I wasn't done. I was only 56 at the time. I knew I wasn't done, but I didn't want to just jump straight back into another big job. I still didn't particularly need to be a CEO. So it gave me time to plan, how do I continue to have impact, how do I continue to contribute without having to have the big job. I won't lie that LinkedIn is not a good place for me, because I do still have an ego, and there is still that, you know, little sort of voice in my head, you know, what I should and could be doing, and I have various people, you know, with great ambitions for what I could do next. So I challenged myself in that, because humility is also very important to me, and, you know, challenge myself to stick to basically go where I feel I can make a difference and where people value what I bring. So that's what I've been doing. So first thing I did was I was invited by someone I'd worked with, a woman called Libby Lloyd, to join the board of Community Refugee Sponsorship Australia. I sort of had a hint of, but didn't quite know that I was perhaps part of her exit plan. She's an amazing woman, has an amazing number of other things, but I was very pleased to be able to take on the chair role, I think about 6 months later. So I've been doing that for nearly 4 years now. I wanted to keep a foot in the disaster space, so I applied to be a member of the State Emergency Service. I deliberately didn't seek a role in Red Cross, because I'd been at a senior leadership role, and I really thought it's not a good idea when organisations are going through a lot of change to be the person in the background going, oh, I wouldn't have done that. So I deliberately haven't, I've kept in contact with people, but I deliberately haven't sought to be involved that I'd like to at some stage in the future, but State Emergency Service has a lot of things that are very familiar: volunteers, emergency focus, great long-standing organisation. So I've just been reappointed to that for my second term. I mentioned Pitt and RMIT. I've done a full circle. So I did my social work there, went back and did my master's, and now I just threw my hat in the ring to be a tutor, and it happened that someone who was working there knew me from my days in community health. We'd worked from one of the migrant resource centres, and someone else there also knew me from Red Cross. So I was plucked out of the list, and I really didn't know when I first started, this is my 4th year, whether it was really going to add value, was going to add enough value for me, because a lot of students don't come to tutorials. That's what I'm doing, I'm going to tutorials, I'm not lecturing, I go to tutorials. I am the face that they have contact with in the teaching team, because all the lectures pretty much are online, they do their readings. And I first went, only about half students turn up. And then I started to see some feedback from the students, and I just locked into what could I offer that the teaching team couldn't. And it's not retraining as an academic, no desire to do a PhD, no desire to rebuild a career in academia. But it was my experience bringing my social work, as well as having done the leadership work, as well as understanding communities. It's that sort of 35, 40 years of experience that they just don't get a lot of. They're amazing teachers, amazing people, but a lot of people who tutor are studying themselves, or got pathways into academia, or are earlier in their career. So I started to lock on. So I teach in community work. In fact, one of the things I'm about to this week mark assignments around community work. It's bringing me back to my roots, and originally I thought, I've been out of practice for so long, but I remember then how much I brought social work into all the work that I've done. That's the lens I've looked at everything that I've done through. So I teach now in the undergraduate as well as the master's program. I've worked out, again, the students to really, not the students to focus on, but the students who really engage. That's where I get my sort of payback. And I'm learning, because this is, again, that sort of re-radicalised me. This is happening a third time in my career. This is re-engaging me with theory and re-engaging what we sort of call my critical muscle, to really thinking about what's going on in society and what change is still needed. And then a bit of a square peg in a round hole. I'm part of a group called Social Impact Hub, which is Sydney-based, that works more with social enterprises, social entrepreneurs, does a lot of things around impact investing. So I'm heading home from here to do a mentor session with them. They have a fellowship program a couple of times a year, and I'm always on a panel at the start of that, which is, what does impact mean? And I drive a really strong sort of community focus to impact, whereas a lot of the other people will drive much more of a social enterprise focus. And then I've done some work with the Victorian Electoral Commission around advocacy, and that's me. So I'm very happy to take questions on any of that, but I've probably run over time already.
No, that's fine. That's terrific. No, terrific. Now, any questions that anyone would like to ask Noel? Yeah.
So I've never worked out what's the difference between an asylum seeker and a refugee.
Sure. So a refugee is someone who has already been assessed to meet the definition of refugee, United Nations definition. So you need to be out of your country of origin. Your country of origin needs to be incapable of protecting you, and you need to have a well-founded fear of persecution for a range of reasons, race, religion, political opinion. So asylum seekers have left their country, but no one's yet assessed whether they actually meet that definition of a refugee. So typically, refugees might arrive in a refugee camp and get assessed by the United Nations, or they arrive as an asylum seeker in a country like Australia, and then Australia assesses whether they meet the definition of refugee. They're the same thing, one's been recognised, the other hasn't yet. Not all asylum seekers will be recognised to be refugees, that doesn't mean they don't need protection, because the refugee definition is also quite narrow. It's very narrow, so that's why it becomes quite contentious. But I'm not a refugee lawyer, but the refugee lawyers will tell you that it's important to protect what a refugee is, so really define that. But then we talk about complementary protection. Sometimes there are other groups that also need protection that don't meet that definition. But yeah, asylum seekers are largely people who've arrived who haven't yet been assessed.
Okay, anything else?
Yeah.
Yeah.
In regards to the machete-wielding African gangs, or that's a term that the media uses, it's not my term.
Yeah.
Is the parents not able to control the children? Are they totally unable to handle them?
So a couple of things I'd say. I mean, one, I'm not from that community, I don't work with that community, but I have colleagues who are from and work with that community. And firstly, I'd say, and I've learned a lot from my own experience around disasters, be very careful of the way that media frames things and the media narrative around things. We only need to go back through waves of migration and go back to the Irish in the early days of Australian colonisation to see the same sorts of things being labelled at various groups. So all new and emerging communities can struggle with adaptation to a new environment. African communities have been in Australia since the 90s. They are becoming quite established communities, and there are amazing entrepreneurs, amazing contributors. Second thing I'd say, it is perhaps easier for people to physically identify somebody and then make an assumption about what's going on. Because the flip side of this is I also hear stories about groups of African people who say they can't travel into town together because if they do, they'll be perceived to be a gang. So there's a whole lot of stuff about the narrative about gangs that's hugely problematic. That's not to say in any community there aren't some bad apples that make bad decisions, and not to say that there aren't some issues intergenerationally in some families, but I don't know those families to know individually what's going on. Very concerned about knife crime and violence, etc. I'd need to have a look at the statistics to say, is it actually growing or is there a perception that it's growing? Because I genuinely don't know myself. I haven't dug into it enough. But yeah, I know what the narrative is, and I always question when I hear those sorts of narratives.
Okay, thanks, Noel. Anything else? All right, well, Noel, thank you very much for sharing your career with us. A fascinating career where you're involved in a lot of challenges, and I'm sure there are plenty more challenges ahead.
A lot of rewards with it, believe me.
Being the person you are, you'll move from one challenge to another, but we really appreciate you coming along and sharing that experience with us today. You have a lot on your plate, but we've got a little something here that we hope might help you to relax.
Thank you. I'm sure it will.
And enjoy. But could we show our appreciation for that? Okay.
Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
My wife has put together a beautiful card for Bert Berriman. And she would be very grateful if each of you could just put a little message on the card for Bert, wishing him well and wishing him a speedy recovery and hoping that he can be back amongst us before too long, and then we can deliver that to Bert. But we'd appreciate if you just put a little thought on the card for Bert. He's been a stalwart of this club. He was our treasurer before Kevin, and we wish him well, and we hope to have him back in our fold before too long. Thanks everyone for being here this morning. It was 9 degrees when we started, and it's one of our best attendances for a while, and that's very encouraging. July, our guest speaker is a gentleman who's spoken to us before, Alan Thompson, and he spoke before about sort of how things work at Parliament House in Canberra. He's going to talk about the Parliament, but in a different way, not so much the sort of behind the scenes workings that he did last time. So we look forward to hearing from Alan at our next meeting. So wish you all the best, and again thanks to Bruce for organising all the electronics and the streaming, etc. Noel's talk has been, and as Laurie's have been recorded and will be available online. Thank you.